discuss about one among the important topics in the reproduction in flowering plant. Topic is very simple, but it is very important also. That is known as pollination. We know that. What do you mean by pollination? That is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a same flower or another flower. That is known as pollination. And you know that different types of pollination: self pollination, cross pollination. And if you see the flow chart, you can understand that there are two types of pollination, which is known as self pollination. Self pollination means pollination takes place by itself, and another one is cross pollination, which is also called as xenogamy. And the cross pollinations are determined by biotic and abiotic factors, that is wind, animals, birds, etc. They are taken into that. And if you see in the self pollination, what is happening is self pollination can be also self pollination. If you see that in a self pollination to takes place, two things are very much important. That means there are two types of flowers are there. One type of flower is in which male and female are present in the same flower. If a self pollination takes place inside that, that particular type of pollination is known as autogamy. Remember that, it should not be confused. Another one is known as in a same plant, two different flowers will be, that means two different sex will be present in a same plant. If pollination takes place in that condition, that particular pollination is known as jatonogamy. And these two are exhibit very much inside the flowering plant. Many flowers are there, many plants are there, those who reproduced by these type of methods. And when we are coming to this self pollination, there are there are advantages also, there are disadvantages also. One of the main advantage of self pollination is self pollination helps to maintain the purity of genes. That means the what are the genes, what are the characters present in the parent, the same character will be expressed in the next generation. One side it is good, but in another side there is a problem is that if the parental plant is having some sort of disease condition or a condition which is not good for the survival of the species, if that particular condition exhibit in all other generations, then that is very much difficult for the survival of species. Number three, that is, um, these plants never depend upon any other external factors for the pollination. So these all the things are important. One side it is an advantage also, another type it is disadvantage also. So when we are coming about the self those who are fertilizing by self pollination, we can see two types of flowers inside that. One type of flower is opened, which is known as the chasmogamous, and one type of flower never opens. That means male and female will be present inside that, and the flower is closed. They That means the pollen transfer takes place within the flower, and that will reproduce. And in chasmogamous, since it is exposed, there is a possibility of cross pollination, and cross pollination may commonly takes place. So once the cross pollination takes place, it is very much important. That means the genes will mix together. And when we are coming to the cross pollination, when cross pollination takes place, if you see to the top of it, if you see here, in cross pollination is also known as xenogamy. Xeno means outside of the species if the pollination is taking place. And we everybody knows that cross pollination can be of are two types. A, which is taken place by abiotic factors, that is non-living, and another one is known as the biotic factors. And in abiotic factors, water, wind, all of them will help. And in biotic factors, living beings like humans, animals, birds, those will help to do. So we have to understand what are the conditions if a plant are undergoing cross pollination, what are the conditions they follow. And one of the main important plant is that the plants which lives in water, how the pollination takes place. And the plants which live in water, you must understand that those plants never produce any fragrance. They don't have any colors like the other flowers what we see outside. They don't have they don't any exhibit any of the characters what we see in the normal flowers. But again, these particular plants undergo pollination. And if you see in this diagram, you can see that these plants, the sex will be separate. That means one is staminate and another one is pistillate. And if you see here, the flower, the staminate stamens are very lower when we compare to the pistillate plant, and the pistils are touching to the top of surface of the water. So what is happening is, when the staminate flower releases that pollen grains, these pollen grains will float on the water. And the pistil is very, it is starting from the base, and it is protruding up till the surface of the water. So when the when the pollen grain is released, they started to float. When they started to float, it will come to the stick to the stigma. When it is come and stick to the stigma, then normal process of fertilization, that means pollen growth of pollen tubes, those type of further process will be taking place. And another one is zoophilus. Zoophilus means if the pollination is taken place by the agents like animals like us. So if this has to be taken place, for example, there are some plants are there which are pollinated by us. And you might have seen that when we walk through some gardens or plants, when we are coming up, some spine like things are attached towards our dress. If you're wearing a pant or something, it will get attached. That is a one type of. And if those are the, if any plants or any flowers are there which are undergoing zoophilus pollination, what is happening is they need a very special character. Once is that if it is should be spread by an animal, so a human like us, so they should be having some pricking activity. That means it has to come and stick to our body or stick to the body of an animal, so that it will be easily carried from one flower to the another. And the next one is anemophilus. Anemophilus means if the pollination is taken place by wind. And there are a lot of flowers are there. For one of the best example we can see is cotton seeds. Cotton, so they are pollinated by wind. So whenever we say that they are pollinated by wind, you must understand that they will be very light. Very light, that means when the wind blows, it can be taken out, and it can pass from one place to another long distance. And they are non-sticky in nature, and they are very light. And they are inconspicuous. That means the flower will be holding these gametes very inside. They will not be exposed much. So when the wind blows, it will be one of the best example is that cotton plant. Next one is endomophilus. Endomophilus means pollination carried by the insects. So insects, bees, butterflies. If any pollination to be taken by or carried by these insects, two three factors are very much important. That means a flower should be bright petals, it should be having bright petals, they should have fragrance, that is, and color, fragrance, temperature factors, those things are very much important. And one of the best example is honeybees. So whenever a honeybee comes towards a flower, one thing they use is the by seeing the color. Next is nectar. And when the flower honeybees comes and attach, when the honeybees comes to that, these honeybees will go inside very inside of the flower. So when they are going inside of the flower, the pollen grains will come and stick to the underside of the body, not the topper side, top part, but the down part of that particular insect. So when it is attached to that, then the honeybee will move to another flower. So that may be a male or that may be a female, we don't know. It depends how these insects are moving, and it will come and stick to that, and the pollination takes place. And the next one is that one is known as the ornithophilus. Ornithophilus means which the where the pollination is taken place by any type of birds. They are known as one of the best example is hummingbird. So hummingbird, you know that hummingbirds survive by using nectar. That is the food they use maximum. So when they comes to take nectar with a long beak, they move into the flower, inside of the flower. That time the pollen grains will come and stick on them. Then when these honeybees are moving to the next flower, it will be get pollinated. So there's a chance of 50 that whenever this pollination is taking place by these biotic factors and abiotic factors, the chance of getting pollination or get pollinated, it is 50-50, and the fertilization chances are also very low. So that everything matters, or every condition, outside condition, inside condition, everything matters for this. But if the pollination takes place, it is of a lot of advantages are there. That means whenever if the pollination is taking place between two different species, a new genetic variety is coming, their survival is very good, and it is very good for the unisexual plants to undergo reproduction. And disadvantages is for this pollination, cross pollination, pollen grains has to be produced huge in number to ensure fertilization. And the quality also matters. If the quality is not good, there is a problem for the cross pollination. If the quality is good, there's a chance of getting pollination, get it pollinated, and that it will get fertilized. So everything matters inside that. And another one more thing, and it is one of the very important question. If you want to understand whether the our surrounding environment is healthy or not, many of the scientists nowadays are checking for these pollinators. For example, these insects like bees, other things. If bees are present in a good amount in and around our surrounding, they consider that the environment is good, because bees can't survive where we are using this chemical sprays to the spray to the flowers, spray to the crops, etc. Those areas they can't survive. Because of this reason, environmentalists are using, they will study these pollinators to study whether this environment is healthy or not. So this also are used inside this. And the next one, what we are going, I have given few questions here, so please go through that. There are many other important questions are also given, which is very commonly asked in the examinations. And the next one is outbreeding outbreeding means, that means promote cross pollination. If we want to promote cross pollination, what are the characters are required? Character is the flower should be of one sex, that should be of unisexual. And dichogamy means stigma and anther has to mature in different types different times. And in some cases the male part will mature faster than the female. It is known as protandry. And sometimes protogamy, that means the female will mature faster than the males. It depends upon the species how they are. And in some conditions, natural barriers prevent the pollen grains, that is hercogamy possible. And after all this thing. And other things you can go through that, it is not much important for that. That means self sterility means uh, those condition genes are unable to recognize the pollen grains when they are coming and sticking on it on the pollen grains. And it is one of the major thing that is coming to the pollen pistil interaction. So before the fertilization has to takes place, after the pollen grains come and stick to the stigma part, one thing is very necessary, that the species has to understand or species has to recognize whether the pollen grain which has come and stick on the stigma is of a same species or of a different species. It is very very important. For example, if a rose, just for an example, a male flower considered as a rose, pollinated by any means, and if it is go and stick to lily which is another species, then a question comes is whether this lily, which type of flower or which type of seed the lily is going to produce again. So it is very much important to understand this pollen pistil interaction. If the pistil or the female part don't recognize the pollen grain, the further proceeding of fertilize, that means the growth of the pollen tubes and other things will never takes place. And this is 100 percentage controlled by the genes. And before that, one thing is should be very important. Whenever these pollen grains come and stick on the stigma, it should be hydrated. Hydrated means the pollen grain should have water content, and the stigma also should not be dry. If they now it is, if it is not, if it is dry, stigma part is dry, the pollen grain will never come and stick on it. And the pollen grains also should not be dry. If the pollen grain is dry, then the breaking of the dehiscence of the pollen grains and the growth of the pollen tube will be very difficult. So these conditions has to be maintained before the growth of the pollen tube. And so these things are very important. In if they are not recognized, the growth of the pollen tube will never takes place, which is 100 percentage governed by the genes. If they are not controlled, if they are not allowed to enter, then there is no fertilization takes place. So these things you have to keep in mind before. And it is very simple, and the questions from this are um, asking in a very simple way: what is the use of pollinator, why we are using pollinators, what is the advantage of self fertilization, what is the disadvantage of for self fertilization, cross pollination, and the next one is outbreeding techniques, and why we need different genetics. That means why we are saying that crossbreeding is advantage over self fertilization. So these questions they are asked in the examination. Concept is very simple. Please go through the notes. If there is anything which you don't understand, or if any mistake I did, or if any problem in understanding, please comment below so that I can understand. And I recommend, before going through the notes, I recommend you to read the textbook. It is very important for a biology student to go through the textbook, because for the board examination also many of the questions are asked in between the lines of NCRT. So understanding its meaning within the line and behind the lines are very much important. So if there is any problem, let me know so that I can correct it. Thank you.